आपका टिकट मैडम जी टिकट हो गया टिकट मैडम टिकट
Good evening. On behalf of Namita Gokhale, William Dalrymple, Sanjoy Roy, and all of us at Teamwork Arts, I welcome you to this session of JLF Words Are Bridges, the series that celebrates the indomitable spirit, diversity, and richness of languages, Indian and international. In this series, we showcase an original work, the translation of the same, and give you an insight into the author's unique world. The series reinforces our vision to ensure the free flow of knowledge, information, and ideas. We present today the many Northeasts, Daribha Lyndem, Jahnavi Barua, and Aruni Kashyap in conversation with Urvashi Butalia. The world in the last decade has acquainted itself to the gems of Northeastern literature. While for the uninitiated, it's a new culture to explore. For those who've been avid readers of this literary tradition, its popularity in the mainstream comes as no surprise. However, how does one define Northeastern literature? The subcultures that it's made up of and its boundaries? An illustrious panel evaluates the representation of language, dialect, and socio-political narrators of the 8 states and explores the place of their authors within larger literary traditions. Daribha Lyndem is a writer and civil servant from Shillong. Nameplace Animal Thing is her debut novel. It's a coming-of-age story about a young Khasi girl growing up in the fast-changing, multicultural Shillong of the 90s. She was named one of the promising writers of 2021 and beyond by Digital Magazine Feminism in India, and in a list of best summer reads of 2020 by Vogue India, and has reviews in The Hindu, The Caravan, First Post, among others. She currently works with the Indian Revenue Service as a Deputy Commissioner of Customs. Daribha lives with her 3 cats and a husband in Mumbai. Jahnavi Barua is an Indian writer based in Bangalore. Next Door, published by Penguin India in 2008, her debut collection of short stories was longlisted for the Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award. Her next, a novel called Rebirth, published by Penguin India in 2010, was shortlisted for the Man Asian Literary Prize and the Commonwealth Writers' Prize. The third, Undertow, a novel, was published by Penguin Random House India Viking Books in February 2020. Her short fiction has been widely anthologized, and her work is part of several university syllabi. Jahnavi studied medicine at university, but is not a practicing doctor. She was born in Guwahati and raised between Assam, Meghalaya, Delhi, and Manchester. Aruni Kashyap writes in 2 languages, English and his native language, Assamese. He is the author of 3 books of fiction, His Father's Disease, Stories, The House with 1,000 Stories, and Noikon Etia Duroit. A winner of the Charles Wallace India Trust Scholarship for Creative Writing to the University of Edinburgh, his poetry collection, There's No Good Time for Bad News, was a finalist for the 2018 Marsh Hawk Press Poetry Prize and 2018 Four-Way Books Levis Award in Poetry. His short stories, poems, and essays have appeared in Catapult, Bitch Media, the Boston Review, Electric Literature, Literary Hub, the Kenyan Review, and others. He's an assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Georgia, Athens, an editor-at-large with the Southern Review of Books, and served as a jury member of the 2020 JCB Prize for Indian Literature. Urvashi Butalia is a feminist writer and publisher. She co-founded Kali for Women, India's first feminist publishing house, and when Kali closed down in 2003, she set up Zuban, a feminist publishing house of which she is now director. She has a long involvement in the women's movement in India and writes and publishes widely on issues related to women and gender. Her best-known published work is the award-winning history of partition titled The Other Side of Silence, Voices from the Partition of India. She's currently completing a new non-fiction work on the life of a trans woman. The session is supported by the JCB Prize for Literature. The JCB Prize for Literature is presented each year to a distinguished work of fiction by an Indian author. The prize aims to celebrate Indian writing and to help readers across the world discover the very best of contemporary Indian literature. It makes significant awards also to translators, without whose input no reader can appreciate the scale and diversity of a language written across and over 20 languages. Presenting now, the many Northeasts, Daribha Lyndem, Jahnavi Barua, and Aruni Kashyap in conversation with Urvashi Butalia.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session with three wonderful writers from this extremely diverse and vast region, which is often clubbed under the same head, the Northeast. We're talking this evening to Jahnavi Barua, Daribha Lyndem, and Aruni Kashyap, who are all writers, as I said, from the Northeast. And we're going to have a conversation about what that category means to them and in their work. There was a time when Aruni particularly used to bristle whenever we talked about the Northeast as a region and writers from the Northeast. But today, I think he promised me he won't bristle. And so to all of you, what I want to ask as an opening gambit, if you like, is our session is titled The Many Northeasts, and there are indeed many, many Northeasts, because apart from the 8 states that comprise the region, there is also the wider geographical and political beyond the borders reaching out of the space into Darjeeling, into Kalimpong, into Myanmar almost, if you like, into Bangladesh in many ways through all the connections. And of course, there are ways in which you as people who belong to the Northeast, as writers who belong to the Northeast, have moved and migrated and taken some of that heritage and that culture with you. So my first question, which I'd like to ask you, is really to speak to both the problem, the challenge, the opportunity of this categorization of the Northeast as the Northeast, which I suppose in some ways denotes a belonging, and in other ways denotes a trap, and in other ways maybe an identity that you want to own. But in some ways also does away with the difference. And given the culture, the particular context of the Northeast, which is often seen only as a region of conflict, it also kind of pushes you into that category. So how do you as writers feel about being thus categorized? And Jahnavi, let me start with you.
Thank you so much, Urvashi. Thank you, JLF, for having us here tonight. To answer your question, my view on this has changed over the years, as many things do. And we had these heated discussions, as you mentioned. People would sort of bristle with indignation when this umbrella term Northeast was used, not just with regard to fiction, but with regard to many other things, politics, development, many other domains in life. And I had this slightly unpopular view many years ago, 15, 20 years ago, that it didn't matter to me that much. I felt we were not seen as single units. We were not seen at all sometimes. And in publishing, at least, and you know that, Urvashi, that as a Northeast, we became a sort of larger entity, an entity of interest to many people outside of it. And it helped, I think, focus a little bit of attention on us. And I said, and I was talking to younger writers who would say, why do they do this? Assam is so different from Meghalaya, so different from Manipur, so different from Nagaland. And I said, it's like American literature or Russian literature. You know, we see it as a huge, big thing. But then as we mature, as people mature, as audiences mature, as publishers mature, we will be seen differently, and we will be seen as writers in our own right. So I do feel it had its place. It did us a service many, many years ago. And now I'm glad to see, and I live in Bangalore, outside of the Northeast, and I am so happy to see that the audience, readers, publishers, people from outside Northeast are now able to distinguish between writing from Shillong, from Guwahati, from Nagaland, from Manipur, and it's naturally evolving into this separateness. So perhaps we wouldn't really have to worry about this label for too much longer.
Okay, let's, Daribha, what do you say about that? Because you too, you live in Bombay, right? And you are from Shillong, and you live and work in Bombay. But what does it say to you? What do you think?
I think that writing from the Northeast would be clubbed in the canon of Indian writing in English, because we are Indian, we're writing in English, and it should be clubbed as that. To have it separated as Northeast, as a subsection of Indian writing in English is fine, but the thing is, you won't say South Indian literature, right? You'd say literature from, you say Tamil literature, Malayalam literature. You won't say South Indian literature. They would bristle as much as we would if we were to club all the states of the South under South Indian literature. They would say we are part of the canon of Indian writing in English. So why are we being, clubbed under one? And I think that's the thing with this. It's because I feel part of this comes from, I think, not understanding and perhaps not wanting to understand the Northeast and how we are so, specifically different. I think people get worried about trying to figure out the differences between different states, and that causes people want to box. It becomes easier to categorize. It just makes people, find it better and easier to understand when you just box people up in categories. So if you box us up as Northeast writing, it becomes less of a hassle for people to actually get into it. So I think that is one of the problems with having this umbrella term, Northeastern writing. But as Jahnavi says, if people are more open nowadays with trying to figure out which part of the literature comes from which part of the Northeast, and I think that's a move in the right direction. But yeah, I think it will take a little more time than, at least in my opinion, it will take a little more time, because it just, apart from literature, everything else, we are just clubbed as, we're quite reductionist, this term Northeast writing. And I don't think there is a move towards calling it, literature from Nagaland or literature from Meghalaya or literature from Manipur. People just want to, make it easier for themselves that way. But yeah.
You've both said something which, it resonates with each other. So Jahnavi mentioned that sometimes we are not seen. Sometimes Northeast writers are not seen. Sometimes they're seen too much, and sometimes they're not seen at all. And you also kind of spoke about people's reluctance to want to understand. And so therefore they kind of box the Northeast into something that they can categorize as one collectivity without seeing the diversity and the difference in that. And I want Aruni to respond to that, but also another thing that, Daribha, you said that there's a kind of, to be seen in the canon of Indian writers writing in English. And there is, of course, insert from different parts of the Northeast, you do get writing in other languages as well, not only the smaller languages like the many different languages in Assam, if you like, but also, for example, and there's a whole tradition of writing in Assamese, in Manipuri, in Hindi writing from Arunachal, and some tribal languages from Arunachal, and so on and so forth. So I'm wondering whether this kind of categorization applies only to the greater visibility of the writers from the Northeast who write in English. It's a question in my mind. And Aruni, maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, I think what both Jahnavi and Daribha has said, they're very important things. But I also want to bring to our attention that we are not taking into cognizance history as well as literary history. For instance, people who debuted after 2000 from Assam, Meghalaya, Nagaland, or any of the Northeast Indian states, we did not have a choice to not call ourselves Northeast. Because in the early 90s, there was a group of poets called the Shillong poets who actually sat down in Nehu and decided to write a treatise on what poetry from Northeast India, especially from Meghalaya and neighboring states, would look like. They decided that they would write differently from Indian English writing. They decided that this would be our features. That was one of the first self-conscious gathering of Northeast poets who decided what Northeast poetry is going to be. It would be in Khasi, it would be in Jayantia, it would be in English, it would be in Assamese, but predominantly an Anglophone group of people actually sat down together. Then we also had the Northeast Writers Forum, and we must not forget the work done by Katha publishers, Zuban publishers, early publishing of Penguin that Ravi Singh actually helped steer and publish a lot of translations from Northeast Indian states. And this group of writers were called, they called themselves the Northeast Writers Forum, and they published a magazine regularly. So when we debuted, Jahnavi or Daribha, we all debuted in the after 2000. There's already a much deep literary history that we were actually made to inherit. So as a result, I think we cannot ignore the fact that this literary history exists, and we are in fact writing because of the wonderful work done by all these writers who headed the Northeast Writers Forum, who translated, who met regularly, who helped each other, supported when nobody in the early publishing world was actually interested in publishing writers for the Northeast. It was only independent publishers like yours, Zuban and Katha, which actually regularly supported and published and translated writers from Northeast. So the Northeast, where does it come from? I'm not a historian, neither am I a literary historian, but actually it comes from an administrative standpoint of a space that needs to be colonized and stained and Indianized because it is not civilized. We were in fact called most of the time savages, the indigenous people of Northeast. So all of this has a very troubled history for sure, but we must, when we are talking about it in 2021, we cannot ignore the contribution of all the writers on whose soldiers we are actually standing, not even sitting, standing. And because of their work, who actually used the category of Northeast as actually a term that they appropriated and the term that they use as a resistance category in order to make themselves heard, just the way many other offensive terms have been appropriated by marginalized communities. I think in similar ways, writers from the Northeast appropriated it, used it as a resistance tool and a weapon, and made themselves heard. All the anthologies you look at, all of Penguin in the 1990s that published translations, all the magazines the Northeast Writers Forum brought out, it is all because of those works that today Daribha is in the JCB shortlist, or Jahnavi is able to write, or I'm able to sit at University of Georgia and talk about Northeast writing. So we must not ignore literary history. But at the same time, we all grew up as Assamese or Manipuris or Khasis. It is only when we moved to Delhi we were called Northeastern, and it comes with a certain set of baggages and expectations and prejudices, and that is what is actually is very troubling. And as a result, also. And as we know that, in the neoliberal market sphere, there are very few scholarly publishers like Urvashi Butalia. So of course, who knows literary history, who is a scholar herself, and in the neoliberal atmosphere, people want a certain kind of work from writers from Northeast. So, and that's because of their lack of cognizance, if I don't want to use the word ignorance, about literary history. So it is a contested term, but I think that it has enabled us to feel a shared sense of community. And it has also led to enormous amount of scholarly works across the world, and not just in India. On my novel itself, I can see like numerous PhD dissertations, numerous academic essays constantly being published. And a lot of these are actually done by people from Northeast who have not had a career outside Northeast. So they are also thinking and reimagining this concept. So what I want to say is that, but eventually, if you ask me, I recently wrote an essay for The Comparatist, which is a publication from the American Comparative Literature Association. I always say that I'm an Assamese writer. This is something that I cannot ignore. And I don't mean this in a jingoistic sense. I mean this in a completely bookish and literary sense. And by Assamese, and I'm just saying the broadest term possible. But at the same time, because of literary history, because of history itself, we also cannot deny ourselves the label of Northeast. And in fact, it has enabled us to make a mark in the world literary scene as a body of writers who is unique, who has different things to say, and who produces radical work that departs from the conventions of Indian English writing. And that makes us richer, actually, doesn't make us any poorer.
Yeah, thank you, Aruni. No, I definitely, I think it makes you richer, and I'm glad you brought up the Northeast Writers Forum, because that was going to be one of my questions to all of you, because there is this extremely vibrant forum, and it isn't dominated by writers from any one state, but it cuts across, and as you say, it has continuing events and publications. And it's not only that. I think one of the interesting things about the Northeast, and always using the word in quotes, is how there have been indigenous writers groups in many of the languages as well. I mean, the Northeast Writers Group holds the entire Northeast together, but there are Manipuri writers groups, there are Naga writers groups, and you pointed out the poets who got together in Shillong. And so maybe, that aspect of it gets a bit forgotten, which is the internal history. So thank you very much for pointing that out. Let me ask you then another question. And Daribha, Jahnavi, if you could respond to this. There is in all of your work, or at least what I've read of it, there is a very, very strong sense of place, and a strong sense of rootedness and belonging, and really the creation of the place is just, I don't know what the word for it is, so moving. Aruni's work also, it's very much in the poems, in the short story collection, and of course in your novel. So, but all of you are living away from that sense of play, that place that you create, or that sense that you create, or at least in the works I've read. What does it mean for you, this belonging, this sense of home? Does the Northeast kind of pull you back all the time, or pull you into itself all the time? Back is not the right term. Does that question make sense? Jahnavi, you're nodding, so why don't you go first?
I think Aruni put it very beautifully when he said that the Northeast is a unique place. And I'm a little older than Aruni and I think Daribha. And when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, it was a land behind this cloudy veil. For the rest of India, there was this beautiful place. There was Cherrapunji, there was Assam, there were the tea gardens, there was Sikkim, there was Arunachal, and they didn't really know what it was all about. And that not knowing us sort of found its way very strongly to us. And I remember growing up in very early years in Shillong, in a place called Haflong, and feeling that really I lived on the edge of the universe. There was this physical sense of being really far from the center of things. And when he said that the Northeast is like a badge of resistance, the term Northeast, also a term that binds us together, it really was that, Urvashi. So when people now say that do we need this term, I always say, like I said, it's maybe politically incorrect, but I do feel that somewhere it holds us together, somewhere it focuses attention on us, somewhere there's a different sense to what being from the Northeast means. Yet we are all very aware of our differences. We know how different I am to someone from Manipur, to someone from Nagaland. We appreciate the differences, but we do know our differences too. Being from this very unique place, and when you leave this place as a very young child, I went to Delhi to study. I did a large part of my schooling in Delhi, and I found I had a lot of explaining to do. Where are you from? What does it mean? Are you Chinese? Do you eat this? Do you speak Hindi? And things are different now. For Aruni and Daribha, things may be different now when they come away from their hometowns. But I found I had to explain myself a lot. And you do then feel that you are different, you are from a different place. And that differentness defines you, and that differentness, like you said, always pulls you back. And if I count, I've lived, I think, most of my adult life outside of Assam, in many places in the country and in the world. Yet, I always say I'm Assamese. Hometown is Guwahati and Shillong, and second home is in Bangalore, but we kind of never forget that we are from Assam. It's, like you said, not a going back, but a constant pulling in. Because of the uniqueness, because of how different we are, I think, from others around us. It makes us very self-aware. There's a lot of insight, and there's a lot of coming home to the roots.
If I can just an additional question, Jahnavi. So you said you've lived outside much of your life, and there is a lot about migration, of course. And earlier, when you responded to my first question, both you and Daribha spoke of a kind of opening up of the world to literature from the different northeastern states and different northeastern provinces and so on. Do you think that part of that is a part of the opening up, if you like, is to do with migration patterns as well, and people going outside and settling there? And a completely irrelevant question to it, but one that I'm fascinated by, does the migration of food play a role in this also? Because Northeast cuisine is now, becoming much more national and international, if one can use those terms.
Absolutely. And I think I've seen the whole, the beginning of the migration and the full flow it's in right now, because I left Assam almost 30 years ago. I went to Bangalore to study and work in I think, the early 90s, 1991, 92, and it's nearly 30 years now. And as you said, there were so few of us there. If we heard somebody speak Assamese, we'd run to somebody in a mall or in a shop and say, hey, are you from Assam? And I'm from Assam. And now I almost speak in Assamese when I normally go out in Bangalore. I assume the other person is probably Assamese, one of 10 would be Assamese, I think. And there's huge numbers of us out there in Bangalore, in Delhi, in Bombay, in many, many cities in India. And it definitely has opened up the Northeast to the rest of the country, to the rest of the world, in fact. And when you mention food, it's so interesting because I always talk about this one incident I had. I was away on holiday in Coorg, and somebody from, I think, the Mint, they were doing a special supplement on cooking, various celebrities, Sanjeev Kapoor types, and they said, what's your favorite recipe? And I got really worried because I'm not much of a cook. And of course, I know my tenga, and we have the, or Aruni will know, masor tenga, the fish tenga. And I said, look, I can give you the masor tenga recipe. And the gentleman from Bombay says, oh, no, that's too common. Can you tell us something else? And then I realized that, we really have opened up. If someone from Bombay knows that masor tenga is the standard common tenga, so I had to rack my brain and give him something called an O tenga, an elephant apple tenga, and he was happy. So if they can now, they know our cuisine so well. I mean, it's really sort of an insight into how things are opening up and people are warming up to each other. And that is the way forward. That is the way forward, I think, for all of us, not just in fiction, but in every other aspect of life.
And Daribha, for you, because you too, in Name, Place, Animal Thing, your wonderful novel, which is shortlisted for the JCB award, you too have a very, very strong sense of place, but you're living in Bombay, but it's like the writer is totally immersed in that sense. And of course, food plays a part in it as well. The meals you're eating at Bahadur's house, and I mean, not you, but your protagonist or whatever. So would you like to talk about that a little bit? Do you think it's opening up because of migration?
I think when you write about being out of the Northeast makes you realize your difference more than when you're in it. When you're in it, you are like, everyone else. But when you're out of it, everyone is there to remind you that you're different. Everyone is there to ask you, oh, where are you from? Or I've been there, or I want to go. And you're reminded of your place by other people, seeing how, different you look. I accost people with just the way I look. So they automatically are interested in where I'm from. And by being out of my place, I think it gives me a kind of detached perspective, because I have distance and I have time and I can mull over these things, and I need those too. And I feel with a small town, there's always a romanticization of a town, because everything we write about our small towns are so rooted in nostalgia and memory, and all these memories just come together only when we're outside. When we're in our own hometowns, say if I'm in Shillong, I won't think about it as much as when I'm out of it, when I'm reminiscing about it. So in reminiscing about it, then I'm able to write about it, I feel, in a better way. And I would like to be as objective as possible, because there is the fear that you will tend to get maudlin and talk about how you're sad that you miss it, and I have to worry about those things when writing. But I think with everybody writing about the Northeast, like Northeastern writers not writing about the Northeast, if they are out of the Northeast, of their hometowns, they will tend to romanticize their own place. And with regard to food, yes, food it's so much, again, like our faces, our food across the senses, the delicate sensibilities of people who are not able to perhaps come to terms with their acquired tastes, let's say, for lack of better terms. So I don't think I discuss much about food in my book, but I think that food is something we cannot extricate from our identities, because so much of the kind of perhaps the kind of discrimination I have faced has always been with regard to food. Always, are jhingur khati hai and all that stuff. So that's the kind of discrimination I have faced, very food based, which is very strange. So I think that yes, food plays an important part in our identity. And I think a few years ago, there was a Northeastern food festival I went to, and that was good. People in Bombay were quite open to, going to that food festival. It was quite packed. But again, this comes from people who want to try. They may not particularly like it, but that, that curiosity must be there with regards to wanting to try something from a different culture. And I feel that, again, this is mostly based on my experiences, that desire or that feeling of wanting to try something different, that needs to be fostered a little bit more. And this is, again, I'm basing mostly on my opinion and my experiences in my own academy. If I would maybe eat bamboo shoot, they would, maybe turn their nose at me and just go, okay, we'll just sit out there. I said, yeah, please, you go sit out there. So yeah, that's what I think about food. It's an important part of our culture.
Yeah, thank you. Again, you said two very interesting things that I want to put to Aruni. One, Aruni, when Daribha was talking about this kind of nostalgic miasma, the lens with which you might remember the past, which kind of is, or recall things. I think that possibly for you, that may not be the case, because in your work, the recall or the writing is quite kind of sharply, the political tensions and uglinesses are not hidden. They underlie so much of So there are writers, I guess, who are also kind of exploring that thing. And the other comment that Daribha made in relation to food, I think also applies in relation to reading and understanding, which is to have an openness, to be willing to try different things, to look at different things. And I think that when we talk of, say, the Northeast and Northeastern writers, we are looking at what those writers are doing. But what we're not asking is the question about the readers. You know, how hard are the readers trying to enter literatures which they have earlier possibly been closed to? And I know this is not a question which you can put to a writer, but you might have a comment on it. So I'm asking you that as well.
Sure. I feel that I have a pretty eclectic demographic of readers. And actually that's because my work seems to be loved by academics a lot. And they end up doing dissertations or academic essays. And they all obviously contact me and sometimes interview me or ask me for references or an essay that is not online. So as a result, I have seen that people from the West and the East, or even people from the US as well, have even from Europe have queried me. It seems that people from different parts of the globe are writing and thinking. I'm more so wondering about my work, but not in the ways I have thought about when I was writing them, but that I guess that's the nature of academic work. They look at how texts interact with other texts, not what the writer was thinking. So I would say that I'm happy to have a very eclectic group of readership, but I do believe that my largest readership exists in Assam. That's because I have written extensively in Assamese, not just uncollected works. I debuted, my first publications were in 2000 in Assamese. From 2000 to 2013, I wrote in Assamese constantly, not just essays and short stories, but also columns. I have written 3 novellas in Assamese that many people don't know about. I've written 1 novel in Assamese that some people know about because of social media. So I would say that I have a very eclectic group of readership, and they are ready to try the different kinds of things that I present in my work. And when they try, the responses are not always pleasant. They bring their own prejudices and pleasures and idiosyncrasies to the reading, but they do engage, and that's what I really like about it.
Okay. So can I ask each of you to talk a little bit about what you're currently writing? Is there anything that's brewing in your head? Jahnavi, I know you have a new novel out soon. Aruni will have something out soon. Let me start with Daribha. Daribha, are you working on something new, or do you have plans to, or are you thinking of writing differently?
I am trying to write something new. The problem is having a full-time job makes it really difficult for me to put aside time for writing. And that's why I can't say when it will be done or how soon it will be done. But yes, I am currently writing something more this time towards about my preparation of the UPSC exam and everything, the entire world that I lived in for so long. It seems hard for me to disassociate myself with this part of my identity, because even as I am being interviewed nowadays regarding the JCB, at least one interview question would be about the job, civil services, and this country's obsession with the bureaucracy, and I cannot seem to extricate myself from that part of my identity, no matter how much I try. And I think I would be doing myself an injustice if I do not talk about that aspect of my life that, it has taken such a chunk of my mental well-being, let's say. And yeah, so I would like, and I think in order to do it justice, I would want to spend as much time writing it. When I read any portion of my book that is out, I feel that, oh, I could have done this better and I could have done that better. This sentence feels terrible. Or I don't know. I think, I don't know if that's a particularly good thing, but I feel that, oh, I have not evolved as a writer as much as I would have. And I don't know if I ever will, because I feel I'll always be, nitpicking something I've written all through my life. But I think when it's finally come to fruition, I hope I'll be able to say, okay, it's not great, but it's good enough, and good enough will do.
I'm sure that'll be the case. And I would say don't go back to it and nitpick. Let it ride into the world, because writers also are like, it's a process and you change and you develop. Jahnavi, what are you, what's coming out for you?
I had a book out last year, and I'm a very, very slow writer. So for me, I'm going to take a deep breath and take some time to think about the next one. But interesting to hear about how Daribha was saying she wants to write about something different, perhaps the part which is to do with her professional life, the UPSC, the civil services. I think I always think as a writer, my central fascination is with people, relationships. But then when my novels come out, they are about people and relationships, but somehow place overtakes everything else. I don't know why it is. Is it because of this Northeast thing? We are from somewhere so different that differentness just seeps into every line, every word. I think what I'd like to do next time around is to write perhaps more closely about people, and maybe make the place a little nameless, a little marginal. So that would be my endeavor, I think. And maybe I'll go back to my first and original core passion, short stories, perhaps in a bit.
Okay, look forward to that. Aruni, what's on your plate?
Well, I'm always working on some of the other project, but I'm really focused on translating right now. And Urvashi, you mentioned multiple times about the importance of thinking about and talking about and discussing many of the non-English, non-Anglophone literary traditions, and in the Northeastern states. So I'm really interested in translating some of the works that I have loved for a long time. So one of those writers is Anuradha Sharma Pujari. Her novel I just finished translating, and I'm trying to find a home for it. Her novel is called Hriday Biggapon, and it is a novel that I go back to whenever I feel really sad. It is a very uplifting novel, despite the fact that it is written and it is set in a time that in Calcutta, and set in the early 90s, early to mid 90s, and when I was very young. But I absolutely love that book. I'm also translating Abdul Samad, who belongs to the Bengal origin Muslim community. He's a major writer in Assam, but I think he has not been translated. 10 years or 11 years ago, when Abdus wrote his first novel, I reached out to him and I said I really liked it, and he said, "Why don't you translate my work?" And I said, I'm a grad student, I don't have time. But now I have the time because I have a full-time job that actually supports me in doing the kind of work I do right now. So I'm pretty active. I've translated multiple stories this year and trying to find a home for those. I'm also trying to translate Yese Dorje Thongsi, another writer who I deeply admire from the Sedukpen tribe in Arunachal. And he writes in Assamese, one of those few writers from Arunachal who are still writing in Assamese, along with Kensam Kenglam or Lumedai. Lumedai is, of course, no more. But I think his work is brilliant and needs to be published internationally. And he's doing something that many Native American writers have done, African writers have done, and he needs to be translated responsibly and published responsibly. So I'm trying to focus myself in passion projects. That really is frustrating sometimes because I really want to sit down every day and write my own work. But passion projects are there because they attract you, and you cannot stop doing it. And I also feel that as an Anglophone writer, it is my political responsibility to do it. And I think Indian English writers traditionally has not engaged with multilinguality. And I think as someone who is able to read in multiple languages of South Asia, I think it is my duty to do it. Yeah. Otherwise, I would be out of history, as Nalin Gaudimer was called. As you used to say, white writers would be out of history.
Thanks, Aruni. Thank you so much. You know, it's lovely that, the focus on writers in Indian languages is so important, but it's also lovely that you made the connection with African writers and Latin American writers, and I think also actually writers from Asia, Japanese writers, Korean writers. There is a way in which the experience of the Northeast, the many varied experiences also connect across those borders. And the same way in which that recognition has come, I'm sure that Northeastern writers too will have that. So I want to thank you all for being so generous with your thoughts. And really just to say that it's just the three of you here, and just between the three of you, we have so much variety. So imagine what it is like when you take the entire region that we call the Northeast and the many languages and the many forms of writing, because between you people also, it's not only that you encompass different states, but also different genres, different forms. You're talking about, wanting to do short stories more and poems and so on and so forth. So I think there is infinite variety, and the title of this talk or this conversation that we are having, the many Northeasts, kind of sums it up. And it's time, I think, that we started to emphasize the diversity and the richness rather than the borders that encapsulate this region. Many, many thanks for being on JLF, and good luck with your work. And I hope it gets out into the world. It does brilliantly, as I'm sure it will.
Thank you, Urvashi. It is always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Aruni. Thank you, Daribha. Thank you, Jahnavi.
Thank you, Urvashi.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daribha Lyndem, Jahnavi Barua, Aruni Kashyap, and Urvashi Butalia for this splendid session. Thank you, JCB Prize for Literature, for your support. Thank you all for being a great audience. On behalf of all of us, please do stay safe until we see you again. Good night.
आपका टिकट मैडम जी टिकट हो गया टिकट मैडम टिकट